Hello everyone and welcome back in another edition of the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Shepard. Thank you for tuning into today's midweek edition of the show. We should have a great one ahead, starting off, as always, with our NBA power rankings, looking at the top 5 teams right now in the league before the All-Star break hits. Then we transition to the world of hockey. We give an awards update in terms of who's in the running for the big awards, like the Hart, like the Norris, like the Calder. Then we transition into the world of baseball. We talk about the final kind of domino of this free agency period waiting to fall. Where will Alex Bregman end up if he even leaves Houston? Because it's a big topic of discussion in the world of baseball, as pitchers and catchers report today, in fact. Then we continue our Bubble Watch segments with the Big East, a very interesting conference, especially in terms of its depth, and then concluding by previewing a shockingly low-stakes matchup between Tottenham Hotspur and Manchester United in the Premier League this weekend. But without further ado, before we get into today's segments, I do want to remind you, as always, to like, follow, and subscribe to the show if you haven't done so already, to keep up to date with all the new content around the network. But if you want to contribute and interact with the show a little bit more directly, consider availing yourselves of the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube, as always, as well as our website, gsmcspodcast.net, to leave any opinions, feedback, or input you have for the show here as well. Great way, as always, like I always say, to interact with the show, and it just makes this show that much better when you, our faithful audience, are interacting with it. But without further ado, let's just jump right into our NBA power rankings to kick off today's show. As always, just the top 5. There are a lot of teams knocking on the door right now. A lot of Lakers fans anxiously anticipating perhaps when they will crack the top 5. But still, I think that these are the 5 best teams in the NBA. You might think otherwise in terms of positioning perhaps, but I still think that the top 5 is pretty much concrete, at least in how I have viewed the league as of late. It doesn't mean that in the next weeks it doesn't change, but I do think that for now, this is a list I'm very happy with, and you have every right to leave your own opinion as well throughout the segment. But without further ado, let's just jump right into it, starting off at number 5. A team kind of in a weird spot in terms of health, in terms of how chaotic things are getting for them, the Memphis Grizzlies. And I think that this Memphis Grizzlies team relies a lot on chaos surrounding this team being under control in order for it to be a true contender. Obviously, over this past week, we saw Ja Morant's father get ejected for getting into it with a couple of officials. We saw them lose in emphatic fashion to the Thunder. So really, their spot in this top 5 could very much be in jeopardy. But as long as Ja Morant is there, and as long as he's playing in a nice fashion for them, and as long as he ultimately remains healthy, I do feel like this Grizzlies team has a chance, and they are going on a 5-game road trip. They did win at Phoenix to start it off, but this road trip is very pivotal, especially as it comes kind of after the All-Star break as well. And during this stretch run, it's pivotal that this Memphis team leaves an indelible mark in our minds that they are a top 5 squad. Because in this stretch, they face the Clippers, the Magic could be a dangerous team, then Cleveland the 23rd, and to close it off, Phoenix as well. So they definitely want to at least be above 500 in this 5-game trip, because if they aren't, and more chaotic things happen with this squad, we could very well see them out of the top 5 over the coming weeks. But for now, they remain in the top 5, no matter how precarious their position might be right now. Then, at number 4, it's the Boston Celtics. They could be a team looking to climb a little bit in these rankings. A lot of pundits had them around the 3 to 4 range. And because of this win streak, because of the fact that this team, no matter who's playing in it as of right now, whether it be, the starting 5 or some depth pieces, are finally starting to coalesce in the regular season. And it might be a bit of a dangerous thing to go into the All-Star break on a high like the Celtics are. But the most important thing about the Celtics team is its health, right? I know that throughout the year, a lot of their guys had to sit out multiple games, whether it be Tatum, Brown, Porzingis, Holiday down the roster. And right now, Holiday is the big concern because he missed his third straight game because the Heat a while back. I do feel that Boston is starting to amp up into form, and their schedule is starting to lighten up. They only face the Knicks the rest of the month on the 23rd, and that's the only team that I feel will give them a good game. But even after what happened Saturday, I'm not quite too certain about that. And so Boston can very well move into the top 2, but for now they sit in my mind in the top 3 in the NBA. And it's going to come down to their health down the stretch in terms of how we really view them as a championship contender. Then we move on to 3rd in this list, and that will be the Cleveland Cavaliers. You can very well make a case that they could be 2nd, but I think that the top 2 teams remain in the Western Conference, even though they're hitting a bit of a skid. But remember, teams that hit skids that appear in this top 5 don't always stay in a rut, and we'll talk about the number 2 team that manner when they come. But the Cleveland Cavaliers looking pretty solid, right? They do have a tough stretch of games where they face New York, Memphis, and Orlando to end the month, but I like how they handle the deadline very well. Didn't necessarily panic. They added DeAndre Hunter. In fact, he was able to aptly replace Strus a couple nights ago, and he did very effectively help Cleveland beat Minnesota, and that was their 25th home win. An important stat to note, the most home wins of any team before the All-Star break this season. So Cleveland, if they continue in this manner, stockpile wins in the Eastern Conference. They're going to have home court advantage, and you definitely don't want to go on the road, it seems like, to Quicken Loans Arena if you're a top East team, because Cleveland is so dominant at home before the break. And the addition of DeAndre Hunter just gives them much more depth to supplement this very solid, balanced starting 5. So look for Cleveland to continue to improve. Look for Cleveland to really settle in, and look for them to ultimately start to make some more noise down the stretch run and coming the postseason time. Then at number 2, here's where things get a little bit iffy, because this team has not necessarily been in good form, and there are people starting to call into question the overall depth of the squad, whether or not they shouldn't have stood pat at the trade-in line and actually done something to really bolster this roster. But for now, I still think that this team will remain in the upper echelon of the Western Conference and these rankings for as long as they don't necessarily turn this blip into a trend, and that is the Houston Rockets. They right now are on a 2-game skid. They had a 6-game skid a couple weeks ago. They finally snapped that with a respite against Toronto, holding them to 87 points. And that's the 10th time this season that the Rockets have held an opponent below 100 points. But unfortunately, they are not the most healthy of squads, and this is where things could come back to bite them in the coming weeks in terms of how they handle the deadline. Fred VanVleet is out for the time being, their starting point guard, and then Alperen Şengün played just 3 minutes before he left Sunday's game with back spasms. So I do think that that's going to be a concern, and if they continue in this period of stagnation, a lot of pundits, a lot of analysts are probably going to call into question the decision at the trade deadline to not necessarily be a little bit aggressive in this period of time where they're starting to make themselves known in the Western Conference and could have gone out for a big piece. But for now, I'm not too worried about them just because I really believe in this young core. And it's not just Şengün and Fred VanVleet that have been doing this. It's been the Greens. It's been the Amen Thompsons. They've been even the Cam Whitmores of the world, the Tari Easons of the world that have really helped this squad develop. And so even if they continue this poor run of form, I still view them as a top team in the Western Conference and in the NBA. But they're not cementing this OKC Thunder team. And the best news they could have possibly gotten, if they got that man at the forefront of my screen, Chet Holmgren, back from an injury. And even though he showed some rust offensively in the 2 games that he's been back, they have finally found the formula where they can win playing with both him and Hartenstein back. Before, we already knew how good it was, but we never necessarily get to see it in depth because of Holmgren's injury. Now that we get to see this dual big lineup, I do feel that we're going to start to see the Thunder really run away in the power rankings over the next couple of weeks. No one's going to be able to touch them if this dual big lineup works like a charm. Give Chet time to develop. Give Hartenstein a chance to develop his rapport with him again, and this team's going to be dangerous. They are plus 25 in 31 minutes with that duo on the court. So eventually, those numbers could even skyrocket more should Chet Holmgren work his way back up to full health and Isaiah Hartenstein maintain his level of efficiency. But overall, this Thunder team is just so dangerous no matter who they throw out there that I will find it very hard to put them below anyone else in these rankings for the time being, because the return of Chet Holmgren spells danger for the rest of the league once he gets going. He's already gotten going on the defensive end, already averaging 4.5 blocks per game over those 2 games that he's been back. So look out, world. The OKC Thunder are coming, and I see no signs of them slowing down in the power rankings and in their quest for a championship. Let me know what you think in the comments below about my NBA power rankings. Coming up next, we transition to the world of hockey. Give you a little bit of a awards watch update there for some of the biggest trophies NHL players can win around the league. We'll be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord,